weeks later, this is going to be mind-blowing news. It's not necessarily new, but it's something that is not being talked about enough. And it's mainly going to affect dealerships and manufacturers, but whatever affects manufacturers and dealerships actually trickles down to the consumer. So hear me out on this. Welcome to HB RV Lifestyle. I'm John Levingston, aka the Honey Badger, and as some of you might know me as the Blowhard, here to give it to you straight and transparent about the RV business as well as some other things. So this podcast episode I'm doing live because what I have to say is going to have a lot of so's and ats and does, and there's going to be some interaction of repeating myself, and it's hard to do that when I record, a regular video. Banks, financial institutions are beginning the process, and some of them are already in the middle of process of pulling back out of industries. Hello, Seeking Truth. Hi, Steve. Thanks. Well, it's not my birthday. My birthday was in July, but thank you. Number one, when I talk about they're pulling out of industry, they're pulling out of basically lending on inventory. So we're starting to see lenders pull out of places that sell retail goods. It's not just RVs, it's also cars, boats, TVs, electronics. The only thing really being stuck and not being affected is stuff we use on an everyday basis, like toothpaste, toothbrush, paper towels, toilet paper, food, etc. Okay. What we are seeing right now, and specifically in the RV industry, is we are seeing floor plan banks, so inventory loan banks, are starting to pull out of the RV industry. They're also pulling out of the car industry and the boat industry. And the biggest reason why they're doing that, in their opinion, is because they're taking too many losses. So even though interest rates are up, they're not making the money they need to in order for that type of loan to be profitable. For that type of loan to be profitable, inventory has to turn at a regular rate. When you have too much imbalance of inventory, and what I mean by that is you have some dealers across the United States and Canada that are overfilled with inventory, and then you have the other part of the country that's or the other part of the industry that's very low on inventory and focusing solely on used, or they're focusing on 25% new, 75% used. So you have these banks are looking at these large corporations, these bigger dealerships, and what they're doing is they are looking and going, well, they're trying to negotiate their interest rate payments and their curtailment payments. And if you don't know what curtailment is, a curtailment's a simple thing. It's paying down the principal of the loan. It's a separate payment that's made to pay down the principal of the actual piece of inventory. Retail, they're still going to do retail loans, Seeking Truth. It's not about you going and purchasing. It's about the dealership being able to purchase from the manufacturer. Okay, so if you go to the Camping World, you go to Blue Compass, you go to Mom and Pop, you could still get a loan with the same banks. What they're doing is they're looking at allocation of funds. So retail is always going to be there. They're going to fund cars, they're going to fund boats, they're going to fund RVs, they're going to fund TVs, they're going to fund lifestyle. They're still going to retail do that. But inventory loans are different. Okay. There are lending institutions that are solely for the RV industry, solely for the boat industry and the car industry, but I'm talking about big banks. US Bank, Wells Fargo, Chase, Manhattan, Bank of America, or sorry, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America. These are companies that are slowly pulling out of the wholesale game of different industries. Now, we saw this before. We've seen this prior. This happened about 10 years ago. About 10 years ago, you watched about half a dozen lending institutions pull out of inventory loans for boats. You saw about 7 years ago, a bunch of lending institutions pull out of the car market, pull out of the car industry. Okay, so it's not abnormal, but what it means for the future of the RV industry is we're going to have to go back to the days when the lending institution is the manufacturer. Okay, now, God rest his soul, I loved Pete Legal to death. Okay, Pete Legal and I had several conversations over the phone while he was alive. And the way him and Bob Martin, who's the president of Thor, set up the whole floor plan game to get these lending institutions involved was very genius. But COVID screwed all that up. COVID-19 screwed it all to hell and made it so difficult that these banks, these lending institutions, are trying to figure out, how can I be profitable? And apparently they are losing money in the boat, car, and RV industry when it comes to wholesale. So I'll give you an example, guys. So Northwood Manufacturing, if you don't know who Northwood is, that's your outdoors RV is part of it. Arctic Fox, Nash, Blackstone. I mean, a bunch of these companies and stuff that's built out of Oregon. They have their own lending institution for inventory. I think that we're going to have to go back to that eventually, because North Point is going to eventually start leaning itself out, because it cannot just... North Point, which is the biggest, probably the largest single entity that is for strictly RV and marine, I believe truly they can't handle the entire inventory of marine, power sports, etc. They don't have if you go look at the background of North Point, they don't have the collateral. They don't have the backing to do everybody. So you're going to have to start going back to the days of Thor Motor Credit. Forest River, Doug Geddard is going to have to start thinking outside the box. And I think his GMs are going to have to come up with a solution where they expand the lending institution they already kind of are a part of and expand it to floor plan. You're going to have to start Thor, which is Keystone, Jayco, Heartland, which is now part of Jayco, Thor Motor Coach, etc., 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 Airstream. These manufacturers, until the lenders start making money and start realizing they're losing out on a profit center, they're going to have to start thinking outside the box for next year. Because I think by the time mid next year, you're going to lose 4 or 5 lending institutions that do floor plan. So if you're a dealer, I would start knocking on Bob Martin's door, Doug Geddard's door. Start knocking down Winnebago's door. Hey guys, what are you going to do? How are you going to solve this? And I think that's a simple solution. They're going to have to financially basically either put all the inventory on consignment with the dealer, or they're going to have to create a lending institution and financially back it and basically do a floor plan through the manufacturer. Now, some of them already have something like that kind of put in place that just doesn't get used. And I'm not going to mention everything because there's some things I can't mention because if I mention them, I'm going to lose some of my contacts in the industry. Okay. But what I will say is there is the infrastructure already there for the manufacturers to do it. It's just a matter of flipping on the light switch and pulling all the levers necessary to get it rolling again. Okay. But if you are a dealer and you are watching and you are a fan, and I'm going to say this to Brinkley too, because probably the institution that's going to be most affected is going to be Alliance, Brinkley, Genesis Supreme RV, because they don't have that infrastructure in place. So if I was Nate Goldenberg, if I'm the Brady boys, if I'm Pablo, we need to start thinking outside the box. Like, how am I going to get my Brinkley fifth wheels on dealership lots next year? And I'm talking about mid to late next year. If Bank of America pulls out, if Wells Fargo pulls out, if JP Morgan pulls out, if Ally pulls out, if ABCDEFG Bank pulls out, how am I going to do that? North Point's not going to do everybody in every piece of inventory. They can't. So how do I do that? Well, you have you create the infrastructure, right? So I'm going to pick on Brinkley for a minute in a positive way. So Brinkley could simply set up a separate entity as a lending institution. You could call it Brinkley Financial or whatever the case may be. And everything that is, let's say you set up a dealer and say, look, dealer AB, you are going to get a $500,000 floor plan through us, but you have to, carry every, one of every segment of our trailers or our fifth wheels, right? And, whatever the interest rate is, 7%, 8%, whatever that rate is, and then do a no curtailment. So no principal payment